And we are live. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Facebook community, Alejandro Tornato here, coming directly from Beaufort, Georgia. And I am so happy because today we're doing a brand new episode of Conversations with Influencers. And you know that I want to bring to you people who are impacting the world, who are game changers, who can help us all perhaps change our thinking paradigms and bring brand new, fresh insights. And today I'm so happy that my special guest is Joanna Bloor, and I want to bring her here. And there she is. Good afternoon. How are you doing, Joanna?
I am fantastic.
Excellent. And if you have seen the post that I did today, the topic or the discussion that we are going to have is dynamite. I mean, it's going to be a dynamic conversation, and the topic, it's great that in combination with Joanna, we came up, with a topic that I think is going to encapsulate what we are going to be talking about. And is this: you are not a robot. We are not robots. And why is it that we need to pay attention to our future self? Now, let me just give you a little bit of a background on Joanna. Joanna believes that it's time for us humans to rethink how we take on the modern working world. And in her early part of her career, Joanna was involved in scaling and building brands. And these are not just little bitty brands. I mean, these are, if I'm going to mention the names, she was involved with Ticketmaster, she was involved with Cars.com, Open Table, and Pandora. My goodness gracious me. So I can tell you right off the bat that when talking to this lady, we are on learning mode. Okay, so just fasten your seatbelts, because this is going to be a great ride, and I'm so happy to have you, because I consider myself a perpetual learner. I want to keep learning. I don't think that age has anything to do with learning more and more and more. And so the more that we field ourselves with new insights, with new learning, the more that we can give to others. I heard it from John Maxwell. We cannot give to others what we do not have ourselves or possess ourselves. So just to begin this, first of all, how have you been navigating this challenging, crazy times with the virus and everything else? I hope you're well, your family is well, but how has it been for you?
Well, it's, I think, for everybody been quite the experience. I know for me personally, a lot of what I'm feeling right now is gratitude, because I have all sorts of fortunate situations in that I have space. I live very close to miles and miles and miles and miles of open space, so lots of hiking trails, and so can get outside quite a bit. But on a professional note, I went from having most of March, April, and May booked as speaking engagements to it all completely going away in about 48 hours. And, as a self-described startup junkie, one of the things that I learned in working at all of those amazing companies is all sorts of weird things can get thrown in your way. And when you are inventing something new from the very beginning, you have to get very comfortable with pivoting. And so we very quickly pivoted so fast that I think we're still spinning a tiny bit, and continue to experiment with how to move forward with what it is we're doing and how we're navigating everything. So, you know, this sounds kind of obnoxious, but you know, when things get crazy hard and a little bit out of control, I am really in my element and I get a little overachievy, which is why I loved being in the startup world for so long, because it's kind of that all the time. And so I've thrived. Is that a terrible thing to say? And I've been so fortunate. Like, again, I have space. I have no family who's been personally impacted. I have some friends who've been sick, but haven't had any heartbreak. My heart goes out to people who really have, and those who don't have all of that. But for me, like, I have a funny feeling this is going to be one of those things where I go, gosh, COVID and all of it actually helped me refocus who I needed to be and where I needed to go, and has absolutely done that.
Sure. Well, you know, I mean, as I'm listening to you, a few thoughts come into my mind, and one of them is, you know, there are some people that when difficulties come, when obstacles come, when challenging things come, when the unknown comes to them, they just freak out and they just throw their hands in the air and says, what is going on? And then for others, and you are a prime example of that, is the giant doors of opportunity are opening. So why do you think, I mean, with all the experience that you have accumulated so far, why do you think that some people are still in the year 2020 so afraid of change and the unknown? Why do you think that is?
Well, lots of reasons, right? And this is why when you and I were talking at the beginning, I said, why don't we just say you're not a robot? And, you know, to give you a little bit of the story, and I know they're like, wait a second, this lady doesn't sound, she has a little bit of an accent too. You know, I emigrated from England to Texas as a teenager. I was only 15. There were a lot of other moving parts that made it particularly weird. And just to paint a little bit of a picture of how already you think it's about, technically we're supposed to speak the same language. We do not, by the way. English is different from American English. But I was going to school in England at a school that could only be described as like Hogwarts without boys or magic. So a very Victorian, very strict, very academic, very old private girls' school. And I moved to Texas. And if you've seen the show Friday Night Lights, the actual school that they modeled it after was probably less than 20 miles away from where I went to school. And I went to a very similar school with football and cheerleaders and homecoming and all of that. So it was culturally an enormous shift for me in a world where I had been brought up with an enormous amount of societal rules, an enormous amount of cultural rules. You know, English history in itself just goes back for so long. There's a lot of this is how things should be done. And when I moved to the States, among other things, probably the biggest lesson I learned, and at a really interesting age, was all of the rules that I had been given in life, other than the really, really important ones, like, you know, don't hurt anybody else and don't break the law. Although that one I learned was a little fuzzy in places. And the really, you know, be nice to people rules, those were still there. But all of the other ones around who I should be and how I should navigate my life and what was expected from me. Well, like, not only did they tear up the book, but they like set it afire and chucked it out the window. And in a weird way, it was quite liberating for me, because I was like, wait a second, I can make up my own rules and I can figure out what I want to do. And no one, especially because I was a little different and I didn't fit in any mold and all of that, no one can tell me who it is I need to be or what it is I want to do. And so kind of, I don't think I was actually aware of it at the time, but really started to wear the clothing of, well, question the rules, not necessarily rule breaker, but why are they the way they are? And it meant that even as a young woman, I was already saying, well, why should I follow that path? Why should I do things the way they are? But around me noticed at the same time that while I clearly had quite a sense of identity and who I wanted to be,
Sure.
because I had been shifted from everything that was safe and normal, and some of the girls I'd gone to school with in England, I'd gone to school with them for 11 years. One of the girls, even, we were put in bassinet together as babies. Like, I'd known her that long. My relationships were so rich, and I suddenly had, other than really my younger sister and my mom, I didn't have any relationships, and so had to build a whole new set of them. And this idea that as you navigate through life, having a clear idea about who it is you want to be was equally as important as understanding that it wasn't actually all about you, and that how people reacted to you was what mattered, and actually other people's desire to want to hang out with you was important. And again, while I don't think I had the language because I hadn't really started studying it, I really got to understand and naturally grow the skills around, look, if I want to be friends with you, if I want to work with you, if I want to collaborate with you, well, then it was my job to help you see how fun it would be to interact with me. And it became such a natural part of how I operated, is that it started to then really roll into my work. And, I'll never forget, I was at the time running a very high-end fancy bathing suit store in Austin, Texas in my early 20s. And one of my bathing suit models, we were in the middle of a fashion show, turned to me and said, there's this internet thing company that's out there that's looking for salespeople. And I had been very curious about technology at the time. She goes, you're a bit of a nerd, but obviously you're also really good at sales. I think you should talk to them. Would you like an introduction? And I was like, yes, because I was always like, whoa, what is this thing? I want to go experiment. And that's what got me the interview at City Search, which then led to Ticketmaster, and 25 years in building startups, which then solidified, because 1995 internet was 14.4 dial-up. Austin had the highest internet penetration in the United States at the time at 30%. Like, it was, I sound like some old lady here. It was a very different world.
Well, it was at the beginning, at the
it moved well. And I learned, because of all of that, the entire explosion of the dot-com world happened so fast. And I was right at the very beginning of it, that it meant that we were in an industry where there were no rules. There were no rules. We were making things up. And so the muscle of experimentation and moving fast and getting really quick feedback and being very comfortable with what I call the ambiguous future was something that was very natural to me. So to your first question, why is it hard for other people? And not clearly so much with me, is I have decades of practice of, we don't know what is going to happen in the future. And, I am eternally grateful for that practice, because it means now when things go completely cattywampus, I'm able to roll around. What I think has been additionally really interesting over the last decade or so is this rise of the idea that we need to be perfect and we need to be right, and this constant, very visual feedback loop. We live in a world today where your labels, what you post, what you think, what you do, the feedback loop on are you good enough has gone through the roof. I just posted a tweet earlier today about the idea of how we need to have confidence about our rates. And somebody had commented that we should all have the audacity of a pint of organic raspberries, because isn't it offensive that a little tub of organic raspberries costs $7? And we should all have organic raspberry confidence. And I was like, oh my God, that's fantastic. I have to share it. And like everybody else, I immediately have started to pay attention to how many likes am I getting, how many retweets, because it's natural for us as people to want to get that. And we live in this very immediate feedback world, while at the same time, we've also been teaching everybody, like, follow the rules and you will level up. Don't follow the rules, and quite frankly, you could die. You think about education and entertainment. In education today, students are given a syllabus at the beginning of the school year and told, like, for this class, this is what you need to do to get an A, which, why are we surprised? People are doing exactly what it is they need to do to get an A, as they should, right? Then you think about video games. Now, cheat codes and all of that sort of thing aside, it's very clear, like, if you follow the rules and the process of the game, you're going to level up. Unlike, I used to play Monopoly with my sisters when I was young, and we were brutal with each other, and rules were very fluid, and we would make a lot of them up along the way. You can see there's a thread even with my family. But if you go into a video game and try and, game the game or hack the rules, and again, as I said, cheat codes aside, you don't really actually get ahead. Now, I think video games have all sorts of other interesting things that mean we're much better at collaborating through technology and things like that. But we've got this culture of, here are the 10 steps to, or here's what you need to do to, and that there's this roadmap and there's this path. And when you start to unpack all of that and really look into where did all of that start, and I look all the way back to the late 19th century when the Industrial Revolution was happening, and people in the workplace were absolutely brought in to be the machines. We were the robots at the beginning. And you look at the journey of the multiple industrial changes that we have seen in the working world, and we continue to be measured, labeled, described. I mean, good Lord, titles, as an example, goes all the way back to a feudal system in Europe, which is horrifying when you actually understand what it means. And I sit here and I say, look, we are still in this very binary, linear, you are this, you are not that, you have this skill, you don't have this skill world. And yet when you look at today's world, if you look at the 21st century, and this is where I get super excited, you think about where it is we want to go with human beings, and this idea that actually it's the people in your company. That every executive I have talked to has said it's always about the people, it's always about the people. When you think about where we want to go, I sit here and I go, why are we still today talking about ourselves, talking about our teams? And I know we don't mean to, but all of the language and all of the constructs are set in this very kind of robotic, binary, on-off, linear, industrial world, when the reality is both business and technology are much more multidimensional today. And if you're looking at your business, your technology, and your people, there is nothing more multidimensional than the talent that is in your organization. And I sit here and I say, it is time to change all of the tools and how we think about ourselves. And while, yes, delivering on a product, delivering on an idea, and the work that you do is critically important, what I believe is that how we think, almost our own personal operating system, that our ability to do something in the future and our innate ability to do that is actually the value of humans. And so instead of just talking about your past, your experience, your like, oh, don't get me started about how much I dislike resumes. They're terrible. They don't tell a good story. They just tell a story of what you've done. Whereas there isn't a hiring manager, there isn't somebody who's trying to solve a problem anywhere on the planet who doesn't say, I want to include other people on my project for their ability to solve problems in the future, justified by what they've done in the past. And so then I sit here and say, well, why aren't we talking about our potential and our future and all of that sort of stuff, which, by the way, is way more fun and way more interesting. And how do you start thinking of that? So I obsess about this idea of like, forget being the robot you, because you can do the robot you all day. And quite frankly, that's super boring for anybody. Nobody wants to be a robot. And so how do you start thinking about the future you? Because not only is that person really interesting, and yes, it could be a little bit scary because it's ambiguous, but it's also the person that somebody wants on their team. And that's who they're looking for, whether it's for a job or it's somebody to collaborate with tomorrow. So long answer to a very simple question, but there was a lot to unpack there.
Oh, no. Oh, definitely. And thank you so very much. Sure. Now, coming back, I mean, to this thing about resumes that you don't want to talk about, but I think that they are important. Not that resumes are important, but, is the myth that if you want to get a job, then you have to present or you have to give a resume. And my idea is, listen, if you're going to apply for a job in engineering, let's say, okay, if you are already an engineer, if you have the qualifications, okay, pretty much it's assumed, okay, that you can do the job, that you have the ability to do the job. So I think that what is more important, which sometimes is not in the resume, is how can you integrate to the group, to the organization? How can you enhance the organization? What is your value? Not from a technical standpoint, but from a human being, from a thinking contributor a point of view. What is it that you can bring to the table, not from an engineering standpoint, but to make the organization, to make the team, to make even your life being part of this organization so much better and taking it to the next level. And I think that resumes don't do that. And that's why you don't want to talk about resumes.
Well, yeah, I'm fine with talking about resumes because in the whole, how do you, I sit here and I say I've been a startup junkie. Really what I've been is I've been at the forefront of so many industries that have had to reimagine who they are. Like I've watched newspapers, video, audio, all sorts of the restaurant industry completely transformed because of technology. And how do you think about that shift? And part of how you think about that shift is what is it you still hold lightly from the past, because it makes the transition easier for people who aren't as comfortable. And, the resume as an example is, unfortunately, like I look forward to the day when we don't have to do them anymore. You all don't think you're not gonna have to do something, you are, and I have ideas about that too. But in today's world, you do still need to have a resume. I just sit here and say, be conscious and thoughtful about what it is as a marketing tool for you, whatever your job is. And so as an example, and I'm going to start with a little bit of a data point, just to give you an idea of how really they are not working well for you. There were 17.5 billion with a B resumes submitted in the United States of America in 2017 alone. I don't have the most updated data, but you look at that. So back in 2017, there were over, just if you math it out, 200 applicants for every single job that existed in the United States. And that, includes even the ones that don't require resumes, which tells us the math is off. Then you sit here and think about what is actually the sales funnel of how somebody chooses you when you're using a resume. That first top set of a sales funnel is what's called the consideration set when you're thinking about a product. And if you're going through that, for most people, you're going through some online submission applicant tracking system. And they may or may not have some artificial intelligence in there, but either way, they are scanning for keywords. Here's another data point to slightly horrify your listeners, is the average hiring manager looks at your LinkedIn profile and or resume, because they're very similar in a way, for usually no more than 8 seconds. So let's talk about the LinkedIn profile, because I actually think it's a slightly better version. They're looking at your photograph, They're looking at your headline. So what is your title, your label?
That's right.
Then they are logo scanning down this guide. And if they are still interested, they're reading the about, which I sit here and I go, okay, so what is the story you're telling there? Well, is your photograph even telling the right story about who you are and what you're all about? Is your banner behind? Like all of these sorts of questions. Same thing with your resume. And you were talking about engineers. They actually tipped me off to this pro tip when I was talking to a group of engineers the other day. The really smart kids are taking the job description that's been posted, copying it, pasting it onto their resume in white font, shrinking it down so that when their resume goes into the applicant tracking system, every single phrase and or keyword that is in the job description is showing up in their resume for the technology, but not for the eyeball, which I was like, well, y'all are genius. Somebody's clearly going to hack this again and they won't be able to do it. But right now there's a window of opportunity. But you have this whole thing that tells the past that is just being filtered out in the applicant tracking system. And what we don't consider then is usually next step is I'm talking to a recruiter. So what's your job with the recruiter? Your job with the recruiter is to help them understand how to sell you through your future value through to the hiring manager decision maker. What's your job with the hiring manager decision maker? By the time you've gotten there, you're right. They already know your background. They already know you can do the job and or you look like everybody else. So your job is to show that you can, who you are and what you can do in the future. Now, I think it's a combination of who you are. So who am I as a person? What is my style? Can I have, will I fit in? And I have, culturally is actually, because I've got a whole thing about diversity that's different. But like, are you the right person for this opportunity? But also that you can do this. And to your point, and I think this applies to engineers, I think this applies to almost every industry, is actually going way back in history to prior to the Industrial Revolution, is we were all artisans. If you weren't a farmer, but even then your crops were your value, right?
Yeah,
but
right.
Anybody else was an apprentice and an artisan. And you, in essence, working with a master would build a portfolio of your products. And I think about, like, let's use your example of engineers. What I see, and I see them doing the early stages of this, is if you're interviewing to be an engineer on a team, they're going to ask you for your portfolio on GitHub. They're going to ask you what you've built already. And that, in essence, is the same thing as an artist's portfolio. It's just code. And I actually believe we all have a medium that we are really unbelievably talented in, but sometimes naturally and sometimes from time and learning and curiosity in. And it's actually figuring out, how do you highlight not only who you are and what kind of problems you can solve in the program in the future, but also this idea of actually having a portfolio type of approach of your work. And a portfolio might look very different for a nurse or a chef or somebody who's a communications person or a lawyer or an accounting. Like,
Sure.
The idea kind of works everywhere. And so how do you think about those tools? Really different. And it really starts to paint a picture of the more multidimensional you. I then also think, again, really steering away from rules and robots, and this is the way it's done, is really allowing, and boy, I'm a bit done with the word authentic as well, but your authentic self. Oh, it's overused, right? But
it's amazing sometimes when we want to use a word that is appropriate, but a word that has been overused and perhaps over abused in the wrong context, and then you hear it again, authenticity, and so forth. Yes, I know what it means, but it is just, I mean, so many people have used it that is it slowly losing its beauty and its vitality, in a sense.
Well, but that's I'm a student of language. I think the spoken word and specifically the spoken word, I think is fascinating.
Mm.
And every word has its time. And authentic has had its, I think it's had its peak and has gone down. I'm very much against at the moment mentor. Oh, don't get me started. I'm also totally against the word empower. It's an active word and people are using it passively and it makes me crazy. But every word has its time. Plus, and this is what has been such a fascinating thing for me to learn in the work that I do, is any of the positive words, authentic, kind, curious, intelligent, doesn't matter what they are. Everybody is all the words, all of the words, all of the negative words. Well, one could just debate whether high maintenance is actually a negative word or not. But mean, cross, difficult, everybody doesn't believe there are any of those words. And so in any of these labels, we have fads around an idea for a really long time. And I think, authenticity is really important. It's actually a big cornerstone of the work that I do. And this whole idea of being true to yourself, like I wear sequins on virtual Zoom calls or however I'm doing some sort of thing. This is very authentic to who I am. I absolutely own it. And I think we should do this more. And I think we're also so much taught to conform and again, be a robot because this is the way everybody says you should do it. I'm like, nah, let your freak flag fly a little bit, but do it intentionally as opposed to just doing it because you just want to be you and all of this. It's the duality of the fact that a conversation is a double-sided marketplace. I choose to offer you me and give you the option to choose to say, oh, I'm totally going to listen to this crazy lady in sequins, or I'm going to ignore. I think the sequins are a bit weird, but I like what it is she has to say. One should always remember that it's a dialogue and it's not a tell. And I think we've been in the here's the path, here's the tell, here's the everything for so long. And it's time for us to kind of go, wait a second, this should be much more of a balance. And life in your career can be an adventure. It doesn't have to be a path.
Now, Joanna, I mean, the human race, I mean, for years, I mean, has been evolving, I mean, and up to the point that we are now. And you have, I mean, the Industrial Revolution and things, I mean, have been evolving and moving forward. So in your, and we don't have a crystal ball, but between the two of us, I think that you have more of a crystal ball that you can see more clearly what the future perhaps holds. But what do you think as we keep evolving and we keep moving into our future, what do you think the future looks like for humans? And what do we need to start perhaps doing now in order to really fit the mold of the upcoming future?
God, that's a really big, meaty question that you're asking me to do very quickly. So first of all, I want to credit one of the most brilliant people that I know for teaching me actually how to think about the future. Her name's Rachel Francine. She's currently the CEO of a company called Musical Health Technologies, who is at a very high level, has a product called SingFit, and they are helping people with dementia actually remember who they are, which I think is lovely. But she has studied future studies, and it continues to. I keep pushing her to really step into this. But when she talks about the future, and why I say that's a really big question, because she says, look, you have to look at the future in different tranches, because there's the future, which is like, well, what is tomorrow? Then there's what they call the probable future. So an example of probable future is if you look at like video as an example, video is very soon in the near-ish future going to include things like augmented reality, virtual reality, and various variations of that. I don't know if you've played with any of it, but I've already gotten to play with both of them. It's very cool, a little strange, quite an experience across the board. But we can guess that AR and VR, I mean, technically it already is going to be part of our probable future.
Mm-hmm.
She then says, okay, the next question you can ask is also, well, what is your preferable future? We have the opportunity to predict what could happen. And anybody who says they're the futurist, we're all guessing. Well, I'm guessing about what my crystal ball says it's going to say. And so I say, take this, but like, I sit here and say, like, if there are different futures that could manifest, which is the one you really want? And I want to come back. You and I talked about this when we first met around, like, where are we going and where could we go that's actually a preferable future? And this is going to tap into our mutual nerdy selves. Like, at the moment, if you look at this very binary, black and white scarcity, I can only have it, therefore you can't, world we are in to a certain extent at the moment. I don't think we are completely broken, because I see beautiful things all the time, but it does head us a little bit towards a bit of what I call a Mad Maxian future, where it's not a pleasant place to be. If you've seen the movie Mad Max, any versions of. And I sit here and I go, I don't actually want that future. Thank you very much. I'd actually much prefer the kind of the Star Trekian future, where I'm sure if we actually got to know the world that Gene Roddenberry built, it just seems a little kinder and more thoughtful, and certainly has a lot of the danger and experimentation and all of that sort of stuff that we have as humans. And so I sit here and I go, how do we head in that direction? How do we create that preferable future? And again, I'm going to credit Rachel for kind of going, God, there's a nice Star Trek piece here. And, as I thought about that, you think about, and I'm going to go to old school Star Trek for a second, with the characters of Spock and Uhura. And what's true, I want you to think about actually the character of Uhura, because she was a translator on the Enterprise.
Yes.
Then you think about Spock, and he was, I forget what his title was, but he was Spock, and that's what we really know. But Spock apparently was a genius on many levels. So if you're talking, let's
a genius and a very rational. I mean, the very rational kind of a thinking. Yeah. Yes.
One could say, kind of binary, maybe, right? And you sit here and you say, like, if you had tested both Spock and Uhura on their language skills, I have a hunch that Spock would actually do better on the test. Like, if it was yes and no, right and wrong answers, Spock would be better. And yet in the Star Trekian world, Uhura got the job. And she got the job because if you think about what is the job of translation, it's not literally how do you translate the word from X word to Y word. And as somebody who I know speaks a foreign language, you are probably intimately familiar with this. It's actually what is the deeper meaning. And to have deeper meaning, you have to have empathy. And you have to put yourself in the perspective of the other person, which if you look at Uhura and Spock side by side, I don't think Spock scores very high on the empathy score last time I checked. I think it was part of his character. And so while on the skill, Uhura was probably just a smidge below where Spock was when it actually came to language skills, she was way higher. I'm trying to keep my hands in the screen, way higher than he was on empathy and what are currently described as the soft skills, and which also is another word that makes me, I'm like, they are not soft. This is not a fluffy pillow. The human skills are incredibly difficult and incredibly complex. And when you think about artificial intelligence and robotics, they're the hardest part to actually recreate. And I sit here and I say, in the human world, and when I think about the future, that whole part of us is actually the most fascinating, interesting, teachable, et cetera, part of who we are. And I sit here and I say, so back to your crystal ball thing, I sit here and I say, as you are navigating your world, because you are on your own both career adventure and your own life adventure, as you're navigating it, it's actually, instead of saying, like, what is somebody else telling me I should do? Although I've sat here and told you to do a bunch of stuff. What is somebody else trying to tell you what to do? And what is right for the preferable future that I want to build, that is not only for me, but for those that are around me and that I want to be with? Because if you're, well, I guess this is my opinion, it can be somebody else's, but if your preferable future is for you alone, I think we all, I'm guessing your audience is very much not about that, and they're actually about other people. And so if you think about what is that preferable future for all of you, then you can start to figure out who it is you want to be in that preferable future. And so I come back to this, like, really understanding that other people are buying the future you. So step one is actually figure out, who do you want that person to be, and who could that be? And within that whole construct, the complexity that you could be anything you wanted to be. And especially, as crazy as this country is, the most beautiful part about living in the United States, I think one of the most beautiful parts, other than I live in California, so I have perfect weather too, is the fact that in this country, like, I could have gotten on this call with you and said, hey, just a heads up, I've decided to become a plastic surgeon. And people would be like, she might be a bit old to go back to school and study to be a plastic surgeon, but why not? Go her. There's a cultural, what's the word I'm looking for? Encouragement of owning your own destiny and this idea of possibility and potential that doesn't exist anywhere else. I mean, it doesn't exist at the level it does in this country. And it's part of why I love living here, because people literally are like, oh, you want to be something totally different? Go on you. They might think you're a little crazy, but if you do it, not only do they celebrate you if you're a success, but they also sit here and go, well, you tried, and that's fantastic. And I just think it's part of the magic of this country.
Yes, but you know, that's exactly right. And Joanna, a lot of people think that crazy is bad.
No.
But I think that crazy is the best thing that you can do. I mean, crazy and to explore, to go beyond yourself. I mean, to see just to begin discovering what is your own potential.
Yeah.
What you can reach out. I mean, how many messes can you make in life in order to attain the success that you want? And I think that so many people are afraid to fail, are afraid to mess up, are that they don't even try, and they cut themselves short. So we talked about binary. We talk about people that are linear thinkers and so forth. And also we talked about soft skills. I mean, like emotional intelligence and the like. So do you think that as we immerse ourselves into our own futures, do you think that the people who are going to have more or better chances to do something with that future is people who are linear thinkers, or people who are much more creative, people who are more into the soft skills? I mean, not so much into the IQ, but into the EQ side of the equation.
I'm not going to give you the answer you want here, because it depends on what is their adventure. I think you've been too binary. You've said, is it this or this? And the reality is that it's not, because, and let me give you some examples. Like, I've worked with, I was a woman in technology for many, many years. And I know I frustrated a lot of engineers because I am not a linear thinker. And most engineers, I am going to bucket them all for a second. Most engineers are very linear thinkers. It's actually why they are brilliant. Their ability to go step 1, step 2, step 3, and then actually analyze that as they go along is genius. And their skills, the way they are fantastic, are so good. And so understanding who you are and what you're all about is there. I think also about, and you and I are clearly, we like to color outside the lines people. And it's part of why we were like, oh, this would be fun, is less about who is going to win, but it's actually that choice about who is it I want to be. Okay. And I'm actually, my poor sister, I'm going to tell stories about her. My sister, my youngest sister who moved to the States with me when I was young, had a very different experience than I did and reacted very differently to moving to a foreign country. And so for her, as she thinks about the future her, what's important to her is actually not for there to be something crazy every single day. And she and I were talking about it once, and she said, oh, Joanna, she goes, I watch you. And she goes, you in the tree of life, you are out on the skinny branches all the time. And she goes, all I want to do is this, because she goes, I see you flailing around. I see you having huge highs and low lows. And she goes, and I'm scared to death for you most of the time. But she goes, but what I know is you are out there laughing your head off and having a total ball. And she goes, me, however, she goes, I am sitting up on the very tightest edge of the branch to the tree trunk. And I am leaning back on the tree trunk, and I am appreciating its support and its consistency and the fact that it doesn't move, because it then means I can reach out to people if they need a hand. It then means I can see where potentially your dip low is going too low and I need to step in for you. And she has a very, very, we're a really good team together. Clearly, I love my sister very much, because she has a different role to play, and she plays that role for me. I also drag her out onto the skinny branches once in a while because I think it's good to shake things up. But we actually, as two people together, really blend well as sisters. And I think this same dynamic can happen in a team. And I mentioned diversity earlier, and I mean diversity of everything. When, as a team, if everybody is really clear about who they are, who they want to be, and teach other people how that's valuable to them. So if you are a linear thinker, if you are, quieter, and I'm using these labels so lightly because I think, again, we are all of the words. Mm-hmm. A linear thinker can be a multidimensional thinker, as well as a multidimensional thinker can be a linear thinker. There's just some things we have to work a little harder at. An introverted person can be extroverted. I absolutely, although I label extroverted, have introverted moments. The clearer we are about who we are and how we're going to provide value to the other person, and then as a team, what we teaching each other and what we all bring to the table, it then makes collaboration across the team infinitely easier, because the whole conversation about why do I matter within this larger project, whatever it is you're doing, goes away. The whole, why didn't you invite me to a meeting because I have a title, goes away, because you get invited to the meeting because of the value that you bring moving forward in a project. And it's when you can optimize that for everybody and actually find, like, what I ultimately teach at the end of the day is, how do you find that moment in your career? And we've all had them, and what they look like is unique to the individual. That moment in your career where you're confident about your experience and what it is you bring to the table, and your curiosity and interest in what is going to happen in the future are in almost perfect alignment. Like, that's the thing. So everybody says optimize up and to the right. I'm like, no, optimize for that beautiful balance. And that beautiful balance can be optimized across your life. Like, what is that as a parent? Like, I always think about that, the confidence about who you are and what you're at when you're first as a parent is non-existent. But you're super excited about the future, and it evolves over time. And like, how do you optimize for that? And with the idea, because you talked about evolution, that this balance is evolving over time, because life is more complex and messy and changing. And yeah, the pandemic that we are all going through is almost like you had a bunch of these stacked up and it got yanked out from one of the bottom rows, which you thought was super solid and isn't anymore. And so how do you optimize for that that point, and that starts to allow you and the people you work with to have more fun with this idea of the future self and really tapping into your human value.
Sure. And I was just reading another sentence of the bio that you sent me, and I think that ties very nicely. It says, Joanna is a veteran of playing in the undefined future.
Yeah.
And I think that when you talk about that, you are not the person who sits next to the tree trunk. I mean, where things are solid, where things are safe, where there's not too much risk. I mean, where there's no too much shaking back and forth. But you sit at the end of the branch. I mean, where with the wind, I mean, things are just all over the place. I mean,
and you might fall out of the tree once in a while.
Well,
Yeah.
but that is playing in the undefined future, because I mean there is no, and in your own words, what are the benefits, or some of the benefits that you can see in playing and being and spending most of your time in that undefined future?
Well, well, clearly I just think it's fun. But there's so many, like, you get to be an inventor, right? You get to, because you are having to build whatever the future is going to be, right?
You mean an inventor of your own life?
Oh, inventor of everything.
Oh, okay.
Like, here's a ridiculous fact about me. I am one of the co-authors of the Internet Advertising Bureau and the American Association of Advertising Agencies industry standard terms and conditions, versions 1, 2, and 3. I decided not to do version 4 because I was done, which basically meant that I was part of a group of people back in, gosh, what was it, 2001, who actually wrote the legal document together. And yes, we had lawyers involved, that defined how people should buy advertising from each other. Literally got to define the law. I mean, it's the guidelines, but the contractual decisions around when you buy an ad on a website, what are the rules around it? Which not a lawyer, certainly wasn't real. I mean, I was as much of an expert in internet advertising as one could be in 2001 because there weren't a lot of us around, but got to actually invent what that thing is. Now, this is the other benefit that comes from playing in the undefined future and really experimenting all the time, is I learned so much about legal language because I had a legal partner that went through as my guide along this experience, who taught me, what does force majeure mean, and why is it there, and why would a the or an and in a sentence actually make a difference. There were so many phrases, like I learned about what this thing called sequential liability, which before I did that one particular project, no idea what it meant. And you never know. It's a bit that statement will go when you're in school, people go, oh, I don't know why I should have to learn this. I'm never going to use trigonometry or whatever it is. You never know what's going to pop up. And, I think about my job was to travel all over the world and speak at conferences and at companies. And every single one of my contracts had a force majeure clause in it, because they do. And instead of being surprised by it, when everything started shutting down, I was like, they're going to pull the force majeure clause. And so how do I then navigate my relationships with my clients who I know are going to pull a legal term out of the document, and know that there's a different way to navigate a path forward, because the path forward they could only see was cancel. Whereas I was like, hold on a second, we could reinvent and do that. I think so. The idea that you get to be a builder at big and small scale, I think is super fun. Like I loved Legos and all that stuff as a kid. The learning part of it and the adventure and what will you find out. And I won't lie and say finding out stuff before everybody else is kind of great. I still do that today. Like, I'm an avid podcast listener, and I listen to some stuff, which I'll tell you, most of the time I listen to some shows and I'm like, I have no idea what they're talking about. I audited recently the MIT class on quantum mathematics and where does quantum start. And I sort of understand. I can't say that I could even explain it to you. I know what Schrodinger's cat means now, but I know enough to start playing with stuff. And that's the last piece. Is it, for me, certainly, it means the work feels more like play. And I always come back to, and now it's really going to get into my history. I read a book when I was 12 years old called Clever Lazy.
Clever Lazy.
Clever Lazy. It's by a woman called Joan Bodger. And it was set in Ming Dynasty China, so super long time ago. And in this story, a family desperately wanted to have a child and had a little girl rather than a little boy, which they were very super sad about because we all know the story of how boys were more important, etc. And so she was left home alone with chores to do. The mother, however, named her Clever Lazy because the mother realized that she didn't want the future for her daughter that she had for herself of working in fields and all of that good sort of stuff. So she prayed to the goddess and said, will you make my child smart enough so she can not live the life that I did? Hence gave her the name Clever Lazy. And Clever Lazy, as a little girl, invented the broom and the vacuum cleaner and went on to invent all sorts of crazy things like fireworks and what have you. And really the entire moral of the story was, if you can invent a smarter and more efficient way of doing something, then you have more time to do the super fun stuff that you want to do. And as a 12-year-old girl, I was all like, wait a second, I can invent a way of doing stuff. So you can see this whole color outside the lines, invent things, has always been a bit of a narrative. And I really I wanted to go out and play more than do homework, do all those sorts of things. And so when you're in the skinny branches, you do have to experiment and try new things and be comfortable with failing. And I come back to, at the end of the day, there have been multiple times that I have been lying on the floor crying so hard that stuff has been coming out of my nose. I've failed lots along the way, but it's not, I can always feel the failure coming. Like, the failure itself is not the important part for me. I'm like, oh God, crap, this isn't working. It's not going to happen. But it's that getting up from failure and the reinvention and the learn that comes from it that I really live for. I think that is the moment that we ultimately grow and change as humans. And all of the people whose health has been impacted aside, because I think that is horrific. And I also think about some of the social challenges we have with Black Lives Matter. Like, that aside, I look at the impact to what is going to come from this and this period that we're going through. And as humans, we almost, it feels like we need the pain to be able to grow. And so, as a bit of an eternal optimist, I am really curious to what is the future human going to be. And I challenge everyone within that to take like agency of what is it you want yours to be. And thinking about the bigger collective, because we are all in this together. And I said, like, how can we now start thinking about, okay, well, if this is now what we have to work with, what is the preferable future that we could build for ourselves? And, again, this gets to be very deep, rich, philosophical conversations, but it gets really interesting. And
oh, sure. Now, this is not for this conversation, but as I was listening to you, and you were talking about COVID and the racial issues and all of these things that we are experiencing right now, and it occurred to me, it says, do you think, Joanna, that what we are going through right now and COVID-19. I mean, and of course, I mean, the people who have died. I mean, and that is
Heartbreaking.
definitely, I mean, horrific. But do you think that as a race, as a human race, do you think that this was something that it was required
Oh,
for us to really begin to see ourselves and to see there has to be a change? And if there is a change, this, even as
is it the
bad as
catalyst?
it looks like, it has to happen for that change to occur.
You know what? I don't know. And I say I don't know because really, who the heck am I? I'm a lady in sequins. It feels like if you look at history, that we do need these, what I call a swift kick in the ass to make major change. And I'm such a, as you can tell, I'm a bit of a student of history. I'm a particularly a student of both the First and the Second World War, because the domino effect that created both of those is kind of endlessly fascinating to me. And yeah, what could be? For fiction, there's nothing I love more than a good time travel book. And so if any of your listeners have any good time travel books that they can recommend, I'm always looking for new ones to read, because I think that construct is fascinating. So do we need it? Maybe. I don't know. On a very personal note, do I know that I grow more dramatically and I shift myself when I've been really kneecapped? Yes, totally. But I'm also well aware that down for me is very different, because I have an enormous amount of privilege, all the way through to, I sound kind of funny. Like as an example, when I moved to Texas, realized I had very quickly a ridiculous advantage just because I had a British accent. Like immediately they were like, well, you are clearly smarter than us, and you just talk and we think you're fantastic. And I was like, wait, this is ridiculous. I just say words differently. There's absolutely nothing that makes me smarter and anything like that. And so I had an enormous amount of advantages, and all of those sorts of things that have allowed me to do all sorts of things. But on a very personal level, yeah, when things get hard, I do think we grow. Is it required? I don't. Yeah, I don't know if that's necessarily true, because I also think there's probably a story about somebody who went through a growth moment and they didn't, they had a success or something else. And this is where I come back to, like, we are all, I think the millennials have it right. I think we are all unique, special snowflakes. And we are all so unique, and our paths are so unique, that everybody's adventure in life is going to be different. And we are all dealt different cards and different experiences. And so being binary and bucketing one or the other and saying we have to do this, I think doesn't actually nod to the universal uniqueness of everybody. And we are beautifully so.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yes, I think so. And well, just to, just to wrap up this conversation, I love to ask my guest a couple of final questions. And the first one is for you. I mean, and you have had a trajectory of not just failures as you describe them, but you had a trajectory. You had a trajectory of great successes. But I mentioned failures is because I guess if you did not have those failures, I'm sure that you would not have had those successes.
Nope.
And so, what is for you? What is your definition of success?
You threw this at me right at the beginning. For me, success is a surprising result in an experiment, because I live my life as one big experiment. Like, I'm always out there going, oh, will this work or will that work? We've talked about my skinny branches. And I say I go out and do an experiment, and lots of people expect a result from an experiment. And where the fascinating things happen, and where usually the insight happens, is when an experiment goes not awry, but in a way that you weren't expecting. And it's the surprises in experiment results that I think are always the definition of success, because it then leads you to where it is you're going.
The more that I listen to you, there's one word that comes to my awareness, and is, as a matter of fact, two words. I mean, one is experimentation, and the second one is exploration. That you, Joanna, you are so, and I'm saying, freaking determined to keep experimenting and exploring, because it's in the exploration that one grows and one gets to the next level in your development. And let me ask you that second question, and that is, for you, what does it mean for you to live a limitless life?
You asked me that, and I was like, wow, what is it? My limitless life is all based on putting my hand up and allowing other people to choose me. When you asked me that question at the beginning, I was like, what things have I done that have made things limitless, and what things will I do that will continue? And it's literally going, I'll do that. At every big moment of my career. And I'm going to tell a very quick story about how I went from being an ad technology executive to what I do today, which is it's the same and it's not the same. I had the best time working for Pandora. It was such an amazing experience. I got to be there during their hockey stick moment. Like, my team alone went from 30 to 400 people in less than 3 years. We went as a company from 100 million to $1 billion. I worked with the most remarkable people and had such a vision of what we could do, of which I was allowed to help lead us in that direction. It was impactful. It was all of the words. And yet, when the leadership, the CEO actually left the company, who was one of my biggest supporters, and a new CEO came in, and I made the fatal mistake of forgetting to re-audition for my job as an executive. I had been hired originally at Pandora because I had a vision for the future of where it is they needed to go and how they needed to get there, or at least the framework of one. And when the new CEO came in, I didn't have one, and I didn't talk about it, and I hadn't been talking about it. And if you watch a lot of the work that I do, I talk about this idea that every decision made about you is made in a room that you're not in. Well, I hadn't done hi, this is what I can do in the future for you. All I did, because I thought at the time it was the right thing to do, is I talked about, look at what we've done and look at all these amazing accomplishments and all of this. And so, in essence, I was fired. Now, it was a very polite letting go, and I actually think we consciously uncoupled from each other. But I lost my job. And so I was sitting, and this was 5 years ago, heartbroken, because what I had been doing for the last 4 years had been taken away from me. Now, had I let it be taken away from me? Absolutely. But it had been taken away from me. I didn't know what my purpose was. I didn't know what I was going to do next. I was panicked because I am the sole breadwinner, really, of my family. And my husband has a very crazy life and job. I'm an enabler of others too. And I was very lost. And so I picked myself up and I was like, okay, well, take a moment before you jump into another frying pan. And why don't you just do an experiment and see what happens? And what I was curious about the time was 3D printing. I thought it was a fascinating technology. I was also very curious about this burgeoning industry of podcasting. And 5 years ago, it was still very, very early in its development. And I thought, okay, how can I do something with podcasting and 3D printing? Well, at the time, I had also gained a lot of weight from the stress of working at Pandora. And so I said, well, why don't I get fit? And I found a company who, instead of standing on the scale and measuring my success in my fitness journey and weight loss journey through a scale, I was like, I wonder if I can 3D print myself and actually get little digital models of how I'm shrinking over time. And I was like, well, that's kind of funny. Why not? I'll do that. And so for a while, I had a podcast called 3D Lila, which is Late in Life Athlete, where I would 3D print myself every month. I'd stand in this booth and get printed out and had a little color 3D model. And I would interview people about the future of 3D printed food and the future of fitness technology. And I got to meet and talk to the most fascinating people in all sorts of industries. I actually spoke to somebody who was down in Argentina, who was apparently the most famous person in 3D printed food. It was fascinating. And through that adventure, the TED organization heard about what I was doing and what I was up to and said, look, what you're doing is very TED-esque in its approach. Would you be interested in being an entertainment speaker at the next TED conference? And I was like, yes, immediately. I literally they left a message on a Friday and they were like, we'll call you back on Monday. And I was like, oh my God, I have to wait all weekend to hear back. And so then went through the mind-blowing experience of being curated by the TED organization to be one of their speakers, which I'll tell you, that process was as fascinating as actually getting to do a TED Talk. And so was invited and did a very short, what they call one of their comedic presentations about my project to the TED audience, and got to go to the TED conference. And none of that would have happened had I not put my hand up. And it was actually standing in line at the TED conference, which, by the way, for those of you that have not been to TED, when we get to go back to go there, the talks are amazing. Do not get me wrong. The magic of TED is standing in line talking to people, because you will meet somebody. Like, I've gotten to meet some quite famous people, which has been amazing. I stood in line with Shonda Rhimes in a book section of the space once. She's very cool.
I mean, is talking to people after you gave your presentation?
No. It's a week-long thing. You're there as a participant, and everybody's just getting to know each other. It's this amazing environment of chatting with people. I met one guy who I was like, oh, so what do you do? And he was like, I found a new dinosaur. And I was like, of course you did, because who hasn't? I mean, come on. These people are amazing. But I was standing in line talking to a Microsoft executive. She was there representing their augmented reality HoloLens product. And we were just chit-chatting about who we were and what we were all about and getting to know each other. And at the time, while I had no programming, no real structure, I had none of what I do today. But I was obsessed. I had kind of started to own this piece that I had gotten let go from my job, and it was my own fault. And I needed to think about what it is I wanted to be known for. And that first step that I tell everybody about, take agency about who it is you want to be. And I was talking with Amanda about this. And I said, well, if I was to ask people up in Seattle, what are you known for? What do you think the answer would be? And she said, well, I guess I'd be known as Microsoft Girl, because she had been there for 18 years. And I was like, well, that's super boring. You should do something about that. And fortunately, she laughed hard because I'm a bit rough, and she thought it was funny. And I was like, and then she called me 6 weeks later after the TED conference, and she said, I got to speak to some amazing people and see some amazing presentations, but your comment about what it is I'm known for and who I am in my life really stuck with me. And would you be interested in coming up to Redmond up to Washington State and talking to my team about this. And I go, yeah, of course, thinking at the time I was just doing a friend a favor, of course. And she goes, well, can you send me an RFP? And I'm like, oh my God, she's going to pay me. And I'm like, yes, of course, no problem. And I'm like, figure out how to create an invoice and a proposal and And my startup brain immediately went into thing. And then she goes, well, you have a program, right? And I'm like, totally. Figure out the program and everything. I had nothing. I didn't even have a tax ID, nothing. And 6 weeks later, I was up in Redmond presenting. And that's when I got to do my first transformation with somebody and actually show just on the very simplest question, how do you have a better answer to the question, what do you do? And it was in that moment that I learned that I had something bigger to do with my life and more important, and something that I uniquely was valuable to others and could do. And I was at my perfect apex of experience about what I brought to the table and curiosity about what could I do. And it all started up with me crying at the beginning and saying, well, I need to start an experience, and going and standing in a booth and getting 3D printed. And for anybody who, I was technically a bit too old to reinvent myself and all the things. Anybody who is saying, well, I can't do that, I just say, you know what? You go, yeah, you just start an experiment, put your hand up and go, I'll do that. Because you will always learn something new about yourself, about everything. And I now in retrospect can look back at my past and I see that I was a perpetual hand raiser and always the person who was down in front from when I was a little girl all the way up to who I am today. And it's the courage to put your hand up when you don't even know that has led me to where I am today. And so for those of you that aren't used to doing that, I always go, like, you can put your hand up. They might not choose you, but if you don't put your hand up, they don't know to choose you. And if they don't choose you, you can't even try. And that's the heartbreak. So at least put your hand up. And then every so often you may have to do things that make you uncomfortable, but that's half the fun.
And I tell you one thing, and that's the beauty of what you're doing right now. And I saw it somewhere. It says that what you do is you turn people's stories.
Yeah.
You turn people's stories into an amazing bio. I mean, and you try. I mean, you help people in a sense to reinvent themselves. I mean, to see because it's I mean, the 50-second or the 60-second elevator pitch. What do you do? And everybody's like, I mean, they run.
Yeah.
I mean, we become robots in that sense of who we are. But then you have that ability, I mean, to turn stories and to say, no, that's not who you are. This is who you are. And when you are confronted with your version of who the person is just, I mean, you just open a brand new door of opportunities.
Yeah, I get to, I now have the best job ever because I get to literally all day, every day. Well, I get to talk about the future, which I love, but I get to tell people why they are uniquely awesome for a living. I get paid to go, this is what your unique special value is to people in the future, which is super fun because everybody who gets a transformation from me is all like, wait a second, I really am amazing, it's a beautiful moment. And for those of you that are watching, if you want to see a demo of it, if you go to joannabloor.com, there's a video of me on stage at a conference with a beautiful woman called Fatima who goes through the experience. And it's quite dramatic. But not only do I get to show them that they have unique value, which is, I think, so people are really searching for that because right now we get thumbs up and likes and stuff that's a bit vacuous. But also, and this is the important piece, is in the process, I teach them how to share with other people why they're uniquely awesome. And that's, I call myself a potentialist and
That's
fairy
right.
godmother, because the potentialist gives you the language and says, this is who you could be, based on who you are and what it is you want in your future. The fairy godmother then makes it really easy, kind of like Cinderella, for you to be able to manifest the future that you want and teach other people who you are. Because, at the end of the day, the clearer you are about who you are and what it is you want and why that's useful to somebody else, the easier it is for people to choose you when you put your hand up.
That's exactly. But the other thing, what you just said, is that in order to do that, we never have to be afraid of raising our hand and showing up in the world every single day, whether, I heard it from one of my mentors, and this is something that it got stuck in my mind, says, don't wait until you are perfect in something. Jump, go to the edge and jump and build your wings on the way down.
Yeah.
Jump, because if you just go to the edge and you never jump, then you don't know what the opportunities are. So just raise your hand and says, who wants to do that? Whether you know it or not, I want to do it. And then that's an opportunity to begin learning about it.
Yeah, I want to be, because I do think there's a bit of this narrative, I think your coach is right in that the jumping, it's in the jumping that the change happens. But I'm also very aware that that is terrifying. And when we tell that story, we're talking about jumping across a giant crevasse. And when you're trying to make a big change, sometimes the crevasse is so big that, I have a little vertigo. I'd be scared. And what I do think we could do, and this is why I tell the story of my history, is I've been practicing jumping for many, many, many years. And so I look at a big crevasse and I'm like, I gotcha. I'm always like, oh, this crevasse isn't big enough. I want to jump something scarier, because I've got lots of practice doing it. And because we've all been brought up in this right and wrong, here are the rules words, I just think we're out of practice. And so when you talk about jumping and taking risks and just kind of going for it, putting your hand up, I also go it's fine, kind of like everything we have to learn how to do, to take a baby step first. Or you think about riding a bike, it's that first phase is you have training wheels. So don't do a big jump, do a little one.
Yeah.
Do lots of little ones and then make them bigger and bigger. But the beautiful thing, and I love the bicycle riding analogy, is, do you remember what it was like not to know how to ride a bike? Nobody does. Once you've learned how to do the forward momentum, the balance, that whole mix of things that you have to have almost magically right, you can't unforget it, which is why the expression, it's like riding a bike, exists, is you can always go, oh, yes, it's this again. I believe the same thing applies to doing experiments for yourself. Is the first time you do it, it's really scary and you think you're going to fall off and maybe you need training wheels and all of that sort of stuff. And that's okay. That's totally okay. But slowly you'll get better at it. And eventually you won't know what it's like not to be able to do it. And that's when the super fun stuff happens. That's when you can go adventuring.
That's exactly right. And so, Joanna, listen, knowing you, I think that we could keep on talking, until breakfast tomorrow morning. But I truly respect your time and your willingness to do this, and thank you so very much. For all the information that you shared, for all your insights and wisdom and experience that you brought into this conversation. And just before I let you go, for those people who really want to get in touch with you, what are some of the means? And then perhaps I can then, once we finish this, I can put them in the comments, but if you can let us know how people can reach out to you.
Well, the best place to go is to joannabloor.com. That's JoannaBloor.com. And there's all sorts of ways you can contact us there, and you can see examples of me doing a transformation. But I'm also on most of the socials at Joanna Bloor. And so Twitter and LinkedIn are probably the best places to find me. Pro tip on LinkedIn, send a personalized note when you connect with how you know me, because I want a paper trail of how we found out about each other. So I'm always happy to connect with folks there. Just tell me why. And then on Twitter as well, we post stuff all week, all the time, about how to navigate the future you space and how to start thinking about it. And as I mentioned, we actually do a live show every Friday at noon Pacific. I come in with my sequins, and there are transformations and toolkits and all sorts of other good stuff for people to really learn more. So if you've, in listening to this, gone, hang on a second, I want to think about how I think about the future me, that's a really good place to get a little bit of a taste of how to start doing that. And tickets are limited, but we do invite people in because it then gives us some really great one-on-one time. So yeah, reach out. Would love it.
Excellent. I really appreciate it. And it's from the very first moment that I got to know you, I could see your passion for impacting other people, and for helping other people, and for helping other people going to the next level in their life experience, and to step into that future with even greater confidence. And it's so great. I mean, I certainly enjoyed our conversation, and definitely I will stay in touch.
I love that.
And I really appreciate it. So
no, thank you so much for inviting me. It was super fun. And for you and for the rest of your audience, I really look forward to eventually meeting in person the future you.
Sure. Yes. Oh, definitely. And so, I mean, I don't want to end every broadcast by reminding you to live every moment. I mean, to be resilient, and also to be kind, to be passionate, be intentional, and listen, pay attention to your future self, because it will certainly benefit you. Thank you, Joanna.
Thank
Take care.
you.
All the very best. Bye-bye.